In March 2026, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi arrived at the White House for a summit billed as a decisive step toward a reinforced security partnership. During a press pool in the Oval Office, a reporter asked why the U.S. had failed to notify allies before launching military strikes in the Middle East. President Trump explained that he valued the element of surprise. Then, looking directly at Takaichi, he added, "Who knows surprise better than Japan? Why don't you ask about Pearl Harbor?" The room filled with a nervous, cautious laughter that quickly dissolved into silence. Prime Minister Takaichi, sitting perfectly still, widened her eyes and maintained a rigid, frozen smile. This public submission sat in direct opposition to Takaichi's domestic image. Only 5 months earlier, she had won an absolute majority in the Japanese Diet by promising a return to assertive, unapologetic Japanese nationalism. The president's remark was a calculated psychological move. By invoking a historical wound in the first minutes of the meeting, he established an immediate hierarchy, forcing the prime minister into a defensive posture before negotiations even began. Tokyo's loss of leverage was the result of a sudden escalation thousands of miles away. On February 28th, a joint U.S.-Israeli operation resulted in the assassination of Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Iran's military response was immediate. They successfully blockaded the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow strategic waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, through which roughly 1/5 of the world's total oil consumption passes. For Japan, this blockade was a direct threat to national survival. The country relies on the Persian Gulf for 95% of its crude oil imports, a flow that abruptly stops when the strait is closed. President Trump capitalized on this crisis by issuing an ultimatum to U.S. allies, specifically calling on Japan to deploy its own warships to the Middle East to secure these vital energy shipments. The conflict in Iran transformed Japan's energy dependency into a tool Washington could use to demand a new level of military cooperation. Japan, however, faced a legal wall. Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, the Pacifist Clause, strictly limits the country's ability to send military forces into foreign combat zones. Takaichi frequently claims the mantle of the late Shinzo Abe, who sought to normalize Japan's military status. But faced with a direct request to protect her country's oil supply, she was paralyzed by the same legal constraints she had promised to overcome. When Tokyo declined to send ships, Washington began shifting its own Pacific forces toward the Middle East. For the first time in decades, the American security umbrella over Japan started to thin. Regional rivals immediately moved to fill that vacuum. While American carriers moved toward Iran, China launched massive military exercises surrounding Taiwan, bringing high-intensity military maneuvers directly to Japan's maritime borders. Japan was now trapped, constitutionally unable to help the U.S., facing an energy crisis and watching its regional security deteriorate as its primary protector shifted focus. This predicament created a new transactional logic for the alliance. If Japan could not contribute military hardware or personnel to the crisis, it would have to contribute cash. The financial cost was revealed shortly after the Oval Office meeting. Takaichi finalized a $40 billion deal for Japanese firms to build advanced nuclear reactors in Tennessee and Alabama. This was just one part of a $73 billion investment package, itself a mere down payment on a $550 billion capital commitment Japan made to avoid new American trade penalties. The president's joke about Pearl Harbor served as the opening for this massive economic transfer. By using historical trauma to suggest a moral debt, he set a price that Japan was forced to pay in industrial concessions. Takaichi successfully secured a temporary reprieve for the alliance, but she did so by confirming a new precedent. The Japanese treasury would now be used to rent American loyalty. In Tokyo, the political fallout has already begun. Takaichi's rivals are using the footage of her frozen smile in the Oval Office to characterize her leadership as subservient rather than strong. Beijing is also using the incident for its own ends. State media across the global south is highlighting the friction as proof that relying on American security guarantees requires a public surrender of national dignity. The summit revealed a fundamental shift in the U.S.-Japan dynamic. The relationship is moving away from a partnership of shared interests toward a system of rapid, asymmetrical dependency. This creates a unique paradox for Tokyo. The more Takaichi tries to project strength against regional threats, the more she is forced to concede to Washington's increasingly transactional demands. At the closing state dinner, Takaichi declared in English that Japan is back. But as the regional threat grows, the price of the American shield is no longer measured just in yen, but in the public endurance of diplomatic insults.